Like my whole life, there was never like any planning for anything or like, setting aside some time to go do something fun. For many years, I was just going from one debacle to the next, one problem to the next.
Until you get outside of the system and look back at it, you really don't realize. You think this is just, you normalize this
Yeah.
thing.
That's when I started to develop like some kind of faith. But it still took a long time to
Right. Yeah.
take root.
I just want to welcome everybody to Bare Wires. This is our first podcast from our new studio. And I want to welcome Wray here as our first guest. And you'll see through the podcast why he's our first guest. And Corey has a great story to tell. It's about, we're going to call this podcast From Dark to Light, and you'll see that that's the projection that he went. And I want to just give you some background how I know Corey. I sit on a board for Rockland Recovery Homes, and Corey was one of our residents. I met him kind of by accident. He was doing work on a new woman's home for us, and we got talking, and I saw that he had a lot of skills, and basically we hit it off, and he started a business shortly after that, and he's been very successful. So I want to get into how Corey got to where he is, and I want to drift back a little ways to, his childhood and ask him, how was your childhood? What was it about? And did that seem to affect the way your life went on from there?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man. I'm super excited about this. We'll get into a lot of how you coming in and meeting me at the time of my life you did was super important too. So we'll get into that. But, I come from a working class background. Mom was a waitress her whole life. Dad was a carpenter. They loved each other very much. I was born here in Rockland. My mom was taken in by a family, an outside family, like a friend group of hers, because her parents died very young and there was no one around. My real father didn't work out between my mother and my real father, so my mother ended up alone with this family. And they raised me till I was about 4, 5. Awesome family. Lived on the bottom of a place called Stag Hill here in Mahwah, New Jersey. So that's how it started. And my stepfather came into the picture. I was about 4 or 5. They started. I'll never forget the first day he came to the house. He had this long red hair. He had this mean look on his face, and he knocked on the door. And I was just this little tyke. I remember opening the door, looking at him like, "Who the hell is this guy?" Turns out he was going to be my stepfather. And so shortly after that, they moved out and they got together, and they loved each other, man. They were a great, great, loving couple. Like they had a lot of passion and love for each other, but nasty, alcoholic and drug background. Crack cocaine, heroin, that kind of stuff.
Both of them?
Both of them, yeah. Heroin was like the main thing, but like any habit, like it starts off, just as like a party, and I always knew something was off growing up.
At what age did you start to notice that something was off?
I was right when I told you, when my stepfather came into the picture, my stepfather took us out of there and they got their own place, and I think I might have been about 7 or 8, right? And I found my uncle, who was living with us, in the bathtub, nodded out. He had passed out and he was having an overdose in the bathtub.
And you were about 7 or 8 years old?
I was about 7 or 8, and I didn't.
Oh my God.
So that's when I realized like something wasn't right, And I remember just watching them. The paramedics come. My dad was like my stepfather. I call him my dad because it's the man who raised me. But he was throwing a bunch of ice on him and everything, and I was like, "What the hell's going on here? What's wrong with Uncle Bobby?" At that moment, I knew something was a little different, But still, at that age, you can't really put 2 and 2 together, But their disease progressed, But all the while, like, and you talk about from like the dark to the light, right? All the while, I never realized how lucky I really was. All the while, they taught me so many good things too. My stepfather, who stepped in and took that role as a father when no one else would, right? And my poor mother had me when she was 16 years old.
Okay.
So this poor young girl, she has this son, and she's like, probably like, damn, I need a man to raise this boy.
Did you have brothers and sisters too?
Sister didn't come along until I was about 10 years old or so.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, my mother did what she had to do, and she loved this man, and she decided to let this man raise me. But, you know, very, very early on, you know, he was a drug addict. She was a drug addict. They kept it together for as long as they could, but over time, I guess we'll get into that, it just fell apart, you know. But right around that age is when I started to realize something ain't right, you know.
So, you know, were they habits that were obvious to you at 8, 9, 10 years old? And how did that affect you as far as your daily life goes? You know, when always understanding that there's something not right here. Somebody's not right. I know it should be one way, but it's not the way it should be.
Yeah. So right after, pretty soon, I would say pretty soon after we found my uncle overdosed. He survived, by the way, that one. But soon after that, you know, I would come home from school, you know, and, you know, find them nodding out on the couch, you know, always.
Your parents?
Yeah, always sleeping. But they still had like it together at that point. They still were able to work a job. They're still able to hold down the apartment and all that kind of stuff. But it would still take another, you know, 3 or 4 years after that until it was just plain as day. Like this was not what was going on in some other people's households, you know.
Right.
But they always told me. They drank around me, they used drugs around me, and it was very open. They never really tried to hide it. The heroin stuff, they tried their best to hide that, but it was obvious. You know, spoons with cotton in them, and the needle caps in the couch, and like stuff like that. You know, 10 years old, you lose the remote, and you're grabbing in the couch, and you find a freaking needle cap.
Well, good thing you didn't get stuck, right?
You know, yeah. So, but that kind of stuff was going on, but it really wasn't that bad yet, you know. But
in your mind, it wasn't that
in
bad.
my mind, well, I still had a roof over my head, and I still had clothes on my back.
And you went to school every day?
I went to school every day, and like there was decent Christmases, right?
Okay.
Like there was my stepfather, you know,
which is the standard for childhood, right?
Yeah, you know, just give me a good Christmas and, you know, some new kicks for school, and I'm good, right? And you know, my stepfather they were great people, man. Like, you know, even with that drug problem, I remember like the first year I was like really ready to get a BB gun, you know, and my dad hid the BB gun all wrapped up behind the tree so I couldn't see it, like the movie Christmas Story, you know, and I was so depressed I didn't get a BB gun that year. And he goes, Corey, what's that over behind the tree? You know, he did the whole thing, you know, and I was like, oh, man, I don't know, man, I'm tired, you know. And sure enough, he got me my first pellet gun or BB gun, whatever it was. He was that kind of guy. You know, they were just good people with a drug problem, you know. And at that, it still didn't get to the point it was unmanageable for them until a few years later, you know.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that, you know, as a child, parents can do some horrific things, and you don't lose that love for them. You can see through those faults. You know what I mean? And even though it's affecting you, and you know things are different than other kids, you know, your buddies and your friends' houses, but you know, you'll do anything to protect them, you know, and you look at it from, hey, you know, they may not be the best, but they're mine, you know, and you know, that's good enough, you know, sometimes. And but I'm sure seeing that stuff after a while, you say to yourself, okay, you know, what do I do next? You know, like going through high school, where did you start to say to yourself, okay, this is not right, it's affecting me, I have choices to make. What are my choices? Are they going to be good? Are they going to be bad? Do I just do this because everybody else is doing this? I see my parents doing this. I'm trying to get to, at what point do you say to yourself, okay, this is okay to do, you know?
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, and it's perfect leading into the story, you know? Like, so, like I said, their disease hadn't progressed that much yet. And, but sure enough, like everything, it becomes to a point where it's unmanageable. So we started to make our first geographical changes when they started losing jobs and ruining relationships because of their drug use. Now, I'm still too young to notice what's going on, but I'm just being drug along at this point.
Right.
So I had to be 9 or 10 years old when we made our first move from New York to Florida,
Okay.
right? So now we're moving down to Florida. My mother and my stepfather are away from all their connections that they were from here, Rockland County, you know, and now they're moving down there to try to build a new life. And what they're doing is they're moving away to try to get away from the drugs, right? And so I went along for that ride, and we moved to Florida, and things were good for a few months. I'd say I remember they got me enrolled in school, and I still wasn't so heavily affected at this point. Now, the relationship between me and my stepfather wasn't good, you know, but I still wasn't affected for their drug use that much yet. I didn't see it, but you know, a few months down in Florida, you know, my mother relapsed, and you know, my stepfather found some crack cocaine in the grill. They were getting high outside, and my stepfather was really trying to get away, and I think he was a bit more of the stronger one, and she was a little bit more of the weaker one, and you know, she ended up relapsing, and then, like all drug problems like that, it gets worse over time, and that's when they started like really partying, and that's when I started to see like, oh man, this isn't normal. Like, mom's, you know, leaving at 9, 10 o'clock at night, not coming home till the next morning. Dad's pissed off, yelling at her all the time.
Yeah, was there a lot of argument?
That's when it started. That's when it started, and they still were able to save face a little bit, but you know, I was still too young to really know what was going on to that extent. But what started to happen is, wasn't but about a year at that new place in Florida. They got evicted from there because they couldn't keep up with the habit.
Right.
Then what happens is, I always call, the property value went down. You know, we started moving into lower
What they could
income.
afford and still keep their habit going.
Yeah. So that's when I was like, oh man, we're leaving this place with these kind of people, and now we're over here. This is like, that's when you really, even know how young you are, you start saying like, man, this is different, right?
You'd be surprised. Right?
And so that's when I started to. I probably was turning 11 or 12 at that time. We moved to a place in Clearwater, Florida, about 3 streets down from a place, Martin Luther King Boulevard. So it was Martin Luther King and Lakeview Avenue. We lived on Michigan Avenue, which was 3 or 4 streets up. So it was just that much easier to get to a drug market from where we lived, right? And it's ironic that they decided to move there. You know, it was probably, you know, a little bit of best of both worlds, low income, and, you know, probably they had some friends in that area. And that's when like the party just kicked off. Like I knew by their incompetence, like I could start to get away with stuff. Like I started not to care so much about school, right? I didn't respect them as much, even though they still would whoop the hell out of me if I got out of line, that kind of stuff. But like inside, I lost the respect for them. And I started to get angry and resentful at the world and them. And I was like, why is this happening? Is it, you know, am I not good enough? Is what's wrong? I couldn't put 2 and 2 together on what was happening, but that's when I started to act out. And we lived in that Michigan Avenue for a good 5 or 6 years.
How old was your sister at this time?
She was, I'd say she was, man, that poor girl just got drug along the whole trip, and she was always happy.
Was she aware at this time?
No, way too young. Let's see, I was 10 when she was born, so she's, by the time we're in Florida, she's like 4 or 5,
Right,
something like that, you know, just as happy as can be. You know, the happiest little kid, man, and she was so cute. She had no idea what was going on. And, you know, it was just a party after that. You know, by that point, their self-respect and control was completely gone. They were just along for the ride. Dad was losing jobs. Mom could always find a job as a waitress or whatever. They still tried to work hard as they could. You know, there was some, at this time is when things started to get hairy, because their habit was so bad. My mother was on welfare, and she would get the food stamps and the income for the electric bill. However that worked in Florida. I remember she used to send me to the store with the food stamps. Back then, it wasn't on a card.
No,
it was
the stamps. I mean, you'd see them, and you got to rip them out of the book.
She knew I didn't care. I was going to get cereal and ice creams. I didn't care what they thought of me.
Now you got a card. It looks like a credit card.
Yeah. So, and but what happened was it got out of hand, and you know, and I said we were there about 4 or 5 years, and at that time I got to be around 15. I just wasn't driving yet. I was just about to get my license. You get your license at 16. But anyway, she had got locked up. She went to jail for welfare fraud. And that's when, You know, you say everything happens for a reason. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, probably. You know, she went to jail. She was gone for a little under a year. I think she was gone for like 8 months. But she, believe it or not, she was bringing a lot of the money into the household. You know, she was,
Before that, you mean? Yeah.
before that, even with her habit, you know, she was, you know, because my dad at that point was struggling more with his health and his habit than she was. And, you know, my dad, it was one of those pivotal moments in my life where I was, at that point, I'm very angry at the world, right? My mom's going to jail. I don't understand what's happening. At that point, my stepfather came to me and said, you know, she got locked up. She was gone, you know, and we were in the house all by ourselves that night. And, you know, at this point, the family dynamic is not what it is either. We're not talking to each other. We're literally walking by each other to go to the bathroom without a loving, caring energy, you know. And,
a lot of anger.
Yeah, so it's that kind of environment for going on about 3 or 4 years now, because I'm growing into a young man now, right? So I got a lot of anger, and I'm not a kid anymore. So it's that environment, just to let you know. But he came to me, and you could see the shame in his eyes. He says, listen, I need help at work. You got to come to work with me, you know. And I dropped out of school, and I went to work.
What grade was this?
I was probably in about 8th or 9th grade.
8th or 9th
Yeah,
grade, and
about-
he was asking you to go to work on a daily basis?
Yeah, he needed my help. He had a horrible heroin habit, and he couldn't like physically do what he needed to do without me. You know, he just had, it was like the perfect storm. You know, my mother got locked up. He was also heartbroken about that. I know that now. I didn't know it back then.
Right.
Back then, I'm looking at him like, damn it, bro. You know, you're getting in the way of what I need to do in my life. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I had no idea it was going to be some of the most formative years of my life, you know. And this is right around the time I had my first drug.
So what was it with guys in school, or was it?
No, so-
how did it come to you?
So my mother had got locked up, but I got to say a little bit before she got, a few months or maybe a year before she got locked up, I had my first drug when I was 12 or 13, somewhere around there.
What drug was that?
Percocet.
Okay.
And
So there was no alcohol before that? It was strict.
just Percocet was
just
the
Percocet.
first. Yeah, man. And friends down the street were using them. It was, at that time in Florida, it was a horrible pill epidemic. Very horrible.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
There was doctors, those doctor shops on
Yeah.
every corner.
Pill
And-
farms.
Yeah, and
Pill mills.
Yep. And the neighborhood that we lived in was like that. Everybody partied and traded pills together and got high together, and it was like this party, you know. It was wild. There was always something going on. My dad was always beating somebody up because somebody was hitting on my mom. It was crazy. So right around that time, I took my first drug, and that was it. I was done. You know, it was over. This reminds me of a story. I got to tell you this. So I used my first drug. My mother gave me my first pill because I faked a toothache. I said, Mom, I got a toothache, because I kind of knew she would give me one. Don't ask me how I knew. I said, can I have one of those painkillers that you guys have? Yeah, son, here you go. And she gave me that to me, and that was it. I was hooked. So that started off my thing.
How would you, you know, when you started taking them, how would you resupply yourself with those?
So that's where it really started to go. So what I did was I just, the very next day, it affected me so strong that the very next day I just crawled into their room while they were nodded out and partied out from the last night before, and I started to steal his pills. And I just started to take one at a time, you know, and then within a week, I couldn't take any more because they were just dropping the bottle. You could tell, you know. So, you know, what I did was I couldn't take any more from him, so I knew that the neighbor across the street had his pills from his doctor. And basically strong-armed me and my friend, broke in the guy's house, and basically we didn't put a gun to him. We didn't have a gun or a knife, but we basically faked the drug. We said, we want to buy some pills from you. So we faked the drug deal, and when he brought out the pills, we just grabbed them and ran. And we stole about 300 pills from him that
Wow.
day. Yeah.
Wow.
Back then, don't ask me how I knew these things. I mean, I knew it because I was seeing what my parents were doing, but those drugs did something to me that I couldn't explain, and I just wanted more. And that's how it started. So I was.
So did the guy ever that you took the pills from? Did he ever chase you down?
He was too old and decrepit to chase us, But what happened was my mom caught us down the street and whooped the hell out of me. Took all the pills back. So she, we weren't very smart. We were walking down the same street that everybody has to drive down, and but it was like that. The whole neighborhood was just wild, and I think I just fell into the wild vibe.
So did you said you started when you were in 9th, 10th grade work, and did you finish high school?
No, never went back to finish. I tried. I really tried. When my mom got out of jail, I tried to go back and finish. I was so far gone at that point that I couldn't go to school. I couldn't stay sober. I couldn't concentrate. At this point, we're living at that place, I'm telling you. And they got evicted from there as soon as my mom got out of jail. Then we moved to another place, got evicted from there. At this point, my little sister's coming home from school, and the sheriff's literally putting our furniture on the street. Like, it's getting to that kind of situation, So there was no going back to school after that,
So you were in total chaos.
Yeah. And that's the way it was.
What did you cling to when that total chaos was happening? People putting your furniture out on the street, watching the neighbors look at you, whatever the case may be, where you were going to go next. I mean, what's going through a young boy's mind, a young man's mind at that point? And does he say to himself, "Okay, I'm on my own here, man. I gotta do whatever I gotta do to survive," or do I just go in with the group and figure out what we're all gonna do together? How does that? What transpires in your mind during that chaos that's happening right in front of you?
So when I realized that my parents had like an unlimited supply of pills, I didn't even know it at the time, but there was a piece of me that didn't want to see this keep happening to the family. I started going to work with my dad, and when I was working with him, I loved the man at that. I was my father. He raised me since I was 4 years old, 5 years old, whatever it was. Taught me how to fight, taught me how to be a man, taught me how to carry myself when he still had it together. He did the best he could, right? So I loved him, and I wanted to help. But, what's going on in my mind at that point is just all I wanted to do was just stay high and just stay numb. I always had a girlfriend at that point. I always held on to that. I had a couple really good young girlfriends, good experiences in that area as a young man. I held on to that. And I was just along for the ride, man. What was happening to them was so nasty. It was happening to me too, but it was heartbreaking watching my mom and dad get destroyed. So I stayed around and helped as much as I possibly could.
So when did it start affecting you? When did you start realizing that these drugs were going to present problems to you too? It's not just taking them and getting away with it, but where things started to slide and say, okay, if I keep doing this, I'm taking these drugs, obviously bad things are going to happen. When did those things start affecting you? Not your parents, but you personally.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have been a young man at the time, whatever.
I would say around 16 or 17 years old, I knew I had a serious problem on my hands. And that's when, it stopped being fun. At first it's a lot of fun. It's exciting. You feel amazing, and it was this is a monster, and around that time, right before my late teens, I remember just really contemplating suicide, I just remember, I would rather die, there was no more excitement, at this time. My mother is completely full-blown crack cocaine addict. We would find her in other cities, in hospitals. She would disappear for weeks at a time. I'm still working with my dad, and we basically kept it together as much as we could. And you know what? We did survive. We were installing kitchens, high-end kitchens down in Fort Lauderdale, I think it was, or Sarasota. That's where we would drive from Clearwater to Sarasota every day, and all we had money for was our main thing was a Big Bite hot dog and a Gatorade on the way back from home, and it was the best freaking hot dog and Gatorade you could ever imagine.
So when did you say to yourself, okay, I have a problem, all right, I have two choices. I can continue this way, but you weren't happy. You said the high just wasn't the same. You were
Yeah.
chasing that first high and just wasn't the same. It wasn't fun anymore. Did you do anything at that point to change the circumstance?
Yeah, I changed drugs.
You changed drugs.
I changed drugs.
So you went from Percocet, was it?
It was at that time. It was a lot of Percocet. Methadone,
Right.
right? Oxycontins.
Okay.
Anything you can get your hands on like that. But at that age, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna stay away from the pills. I'll just have a few drinks, and I remember just trying to do that, But here's where life just came in and changed everything up again. At that age, my mother and father decided to split, and all this while, you got to remember, I'm ruining all the relationships in my life. My friends that I had, the decent friends that I might have had, were falling to the wayside. No one wanted to really be around me. I'm losing my license.
Because they didn't want to do these drugs, or it was just a conflict between you and them? You were going one direction, they were going another?
Yeah, most of them didn't have what I had. They
Okay.
could stop and they would have fun.
And did most of your friends have stable families, or they were basically the same situations? I know when I was growing up,
Yeah.
basically, my family was somewhat dysfunctional, but it seemed functional because everybody else's family was dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So I felt like I wasn't really out of whack there,
Yeah.
So it was normal to me to walk into situations and say, okay, they're very much like me. I don't know if that was your experience, or did you have friends that you'd say to go over to their house, boy, this is different than my house?
Oh yeah. So like you said, like a lot of my friends, none of their lives are perfect, right? But and I would say none of them lived, like a high-end lifestyle. But for some reason, all my friends growing up, I can remember, always had a house to go to. We were constantly like sleeping on friends. At that point, the eviction stopped. Now we're just sleeping on people's couches, renting a hotel room, renting a small apartment somewhere. So there was never really a home base.
Right.
That was the different part.
Okay.
And that gave me a lot of anger towards the world. I knew something was seriously wrong with my family. I just couldn't figure it out. And I was blaming them, right? Like who else can you blame?
And at this time, you were doing drugs.
At this time, I'm doing drugs. So, I would also, do drugs, get drugs from them, And part of the thing with my dad was, I help you with the bills, you give me some pills, And that kind of started to happen. So that's a whole nother dynamic that started.
Oh, yeah.
So then there's this dependency upon each other, right? But, but it was that move going to work with him and her going to jail was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. Now I look back on it. But at that point, when all three of us at this point are tearing our lives to the ground, right? My grandfather died. So my mother wanted to stay in Florida. I didn't want to stay in Florida anymore because I ruined every relationship and every bridge I had, and there was no more good friends around, right? I was completely isolated. And, we hopped in the truck, me and my dad and my sister, and we came back to New York from Florida, and we left my mother down there.
Came back to Rockland?
Came back to Rockland, suffering New York. Wow. And that was the worst drive of my life because at that point, I started using when I was 12 or 13. At that point, I was pretty much like one of the first times I was ever completely sober for like a week straight. So I was just out of my mind,
Drive of a nightmare.
Drive of a nightmare, man. It was the longest drive of my life, My poor little sister in the middle of this S10 pickup truck. It was a small S10, and we had all our stuff in the back. He had all his tools in the back, and we made it though, and we got up here, and that's when I started to experience some of the physical withdrawals from drugs and stuff. And that kicked off a whole nother chapter of life. My mother stayed in Florida and went on for another, I'd say like 3 years in her addiction down there. And then me and my dad started to try to work together up here to keep a roof
How
over
old
it.
were you when you came back?
I had to be about 18 or 19. Okay. Yeah.
So at this point, you're 18, 19, you're back in Rockland, you're working with your father.
Yep.
All right. And, you're still doing the drugs. At what point are you saying to yourself, okay, this isn't working in my advantage. I need some help. When do you start saying to yourself, okay, I don't have control over this. Where can I go from help? Is it later on?
So it's getting there, right? So I'm 18, maybe 19 at this point, right? My dad's reconnecting with all his old friends. He can't find work. You know, I was basically getting methadone from him at this point just to be okay with me. And, you know, we got that going on, and I'm drinking a lot. He's drinking a lot. And, you know, we're living with my grandparents. You know, my mother's still down there. At this point, I still, like, think that I'm just going to get away from him somehow, you know, and start my own life, because I was still stuck in this. I didn't want to leave my sister either. I remember that bothered me a lot. I was like, I can't leave you. Looking at the way he was,
knowing what you've been
knowing
through.
what I'm going through, I was like, I couldn't leave her alone, you know. So I got a job pushing carts down at the A&P in Mahwah, New Jersey, and I brought some money in for all three of us for about a year that way, just the food, some gas. We didn't have to pay rent, right? And you know, and then I found cocaine at that age, you know, 19 years old.
How was that introduced to you?
I was at a party. Someone had some, and it was the first time I tried it. And, you know, and then I just became a guy who just wanted to do that, you know. And I figured, you know, if I could just drink a little bit and have some cocaine, I won't have to eat all these pills. Because the methadone and those kind of drugs were really taking a toll on me physically. And, you know, and I just figured, you know what, I didn't want help at that point. You know, I was still trying to manage the situation. Okay. But I would say at about 21 years old, another few years of that.
How would you get the money for the cocaine? Wasn't cheap back then.
I always worked. At that point, I was pushing carts. I was working, moving furniture with my uncle on the weekends. Okay. So I always had like just enough, right. You know. At that point, you know, I still wasn't stealing and robbing and doing that kind of stuff. I was still like working. So
you were still doing everything, working, paying for the cocaine, which expensive at that point. And so, you know, you're providing yourself with the habit. You have enough money. And when do things start to go sideways? When things start to get out of control?
Pretty soon after that. But you asked, like, when was it that I reached out for some help? Right. When I was about 21.
Okay, that was the first time.
I walked into the Marine Recruiting Center in Nanuet, New York. Right, my mother was still in Florida at this point, gone. I haven't talked to her in a long time. My father was just falling apart. My sister just started to like go to middle school, maybe, I don't remember. But she was kind of old enough now to where I was like ready to take off. I felt comfortable for some reason. And I went to the Marine Corps and I walked in there.
It's a strange place to go to get help.
I just thought that was the fastest way out.
I'm like, you know, if you would give me the choices, it wouldn't be, well, I need help. Let me go to the Marine Corps.
I thought it was the fastest way. I said, these guys will get me out of here like tonight, you know? And I was just so done at that point, man. I was so done with life itself. I wanted to kill myself, man. And I was just like, I'll go to the Marines, you know? And I walked into the Marine recruiter and I said, listen, this is what's going on. I didn't tell him about like my dad and everything and family. I just said, listen, man. I didn't tell him about the drugs. I said, listen, I got nothing out here for me in life. I just want to get out of here. I'll do whatever you want. You got a GED? I'm like, oh, man. I ain't got no diploma, nothing, you know? And I'm like,
no GED.
No GED, right? And I was like, please just take me, man. Help me. I was like, please help me. And I begged those guys, you know, and they said, listen, man, you got to get a GED before we can help you, you know? And of course, I never made it back to getting a GED or anything like that. I just kind of...
Did they put you in the right direction to get a GED? Did they tell you where you could get one? Or they just said, you got to get a GED, we don't want to talk to you until then?
I don't remember, but if I could... I don't remember what they did, but I know what I did is I tried to join RCC up here and do my GED up there. Program, and I went and I freaking failed the math by 2 points, and I never went back. Okay. I never went back. Yeah, ain't that like 2 points, and I just gave in. And at that point, my dad had finally landed a construction job with a kitchen company, a cabinet company, and he got me in. So that was like my new beacon of hope. I was like, oh man, $800 a week, let's do it, and let's go, Dad. You know. At that point, I had a little bit of skill.
Was he still doing drugs at this point?
Yeah. He was on the methadone program, so basically, it's not as bad as getting high with heroin.
So he was being provided methadone from a clinic.
Doctor. Yeah, from
Okay.
a clinic. Yeah,
Okay.
right up here in Rockland, and so he was keeping it together the best he could. But at that point, the toll that the drugs were taking on both of us was just unbelievable. But I went on for a few more years, just holding on to that job and trying to make some money and partying. But around that age, my mother came back, and actually, I'm sorry, right before my mother came back, the reason I was about 22, 23, something around there. The uncle I told you about that overdosed the first time, he finally died from an overdose.
Okay.
I found him. I walked in on him. He was dead. And that gave me like an excuse to just let loose, right? I was hurt that he was gone, but I was more just like angry at the world, looking for an excuse to screw up my own life. Right. You know what I mean? Very selfish. But that threw me through a whole few more years of madness, and then my mom came back, and they tried to get back together, her and my dad. Then there was more evictions, more fights, stuff
When
like that.
did you actually split from them, leave them, and say, okay,
So,
all right, I've had enough. I need to get out on my own. And, regardless whether you still had the habit or not, you needed to say, okay, at some point, probably 23, 24, like you're saying, that, okay, I need to go and establish myself somewhere else. And what did you do? How did you do that?
This is such a good, you're asking the perfect questions, because sometimes I forget how to put it all together. So at this point, when my mom came back, they still needed my help, and I still had this tie and this painful tie to them, So we were all living together, and I would chip in my half of the rent, and they would chip in their half, and we had moved all together as a unit for the first time in years up here in Sloatsburg, New York. My mother, my father, and my sister. We had this little apartment in Sloatsburg, New York. And I was getting on the bus every morning. I started a construction company I was working with a couple guys in a construction company, and I was still helping them at that point. I would come home like $400 a week, $500 a week. I'd give them what I needed to give them for the week, and I would use the rest to get high and just get by, whatever.
Right.
No car, no girlfriend at this point. And the thing that tipped it off, what you're talking about, when did I say, like, you know what, this is it? My mother had came back, so that gave me a little bit of like comfortability with like leaving, right? And I didn't see it at the time. I see it now. But I come home one day late, and my dad woke me up in the middle of the night and started a fight with me about why I didn't get him some weed, from my friends, because he couldn't get any weed or something like that. So this guy wakes me up at like 2 a.m, and I'm doing work, I got to be up, and he's so angry I didn't get him this pot, this weed, right? And I'm like, I'm dumbfounded, I'm like, I know all of us are jacked up at this point, but that was when I realized this is it. I was a young man at that point, and I had a lot of anger in me, and I let him go. But I came home that night, the next day, I went to work, and the next day I came home after work, and I started to pack my stuff. And that was the first time that they seen me really leaving. So after all these evictions and all these things that happened in Florida, and all these just painful moments. I mean, I didn't even tell you about the cops and all that. There's so much stuff in there. After all this, my mother was watching this, and I could see the look. She's like, she knew it was time for me to go. She's like, she told me, get out of here, go. Now, this is a woman who just came back from a horrible crack cocaine habit. And she went to heroin when she came back, because that's what everybody does up here. So she basically stopped doing crack cocaine and just got on heroin, and I just was watching her do heroin, and she just looked at me, she's like, go, man,
Jesus.
And as I was packing my stuff, he starts a fight with me, and we had physical altercations before, but never this bad, and I had just had enough of him, He was drinking a lot, and alcohol has a lot different effect on people than heroin, and he was angry and violent, and we went out back and we had a fist fight, like a pretty bad one, and we went to blows, and I got the better of him because he was just shot out, It was not because I was a tough guy, but I was so angry, man, that I really put a beating on this guy, my stepdad, my father,
Right.
And I love this man. Today I could cry just thinking about it, right? But anyway, we had gotten a bad physical fight, and I put a beating on him, and he was hurting, and I left. That's when I left.
That's when you first decided to say, okay, I'm leaving. Trying to get away from this. I'm leaving this behind.
Yeah.
And that's what it took to get to that point. You know, you really had to find yourself in a situation that, you know, was almost desperate to say, okay, I did what I didn't want to do, but now I got to go.
Yeah, it was time, and it happened the way it had to happen, and I packed my shit, and I walked. I caught the bus, and I caught my bus out of Sloatsburg, and I slept in my dead uncle's car. My dead uncle, they gave me his car, and I slept in the car that was parked in my aunt's house. I nearly froze my butt to death that night because it was the middle of winter. No heat, no gas, right? So I was trying to be a tough guy and didn't want to ask anybody for any help.
Right.
You know, I had a lot of pride, and I was mad at the world.
You're still doing drugs at this point?
Oh, yeah, but I'm not, like, that bad at this point.
Okay.
I'm smoking a lot of weed just to keep the thing at bay, you know. I'm really trying at this point because I was really trying, man. The Marines wouldn't take me. I had just so happened I had another amazing guy come into my life at that time. His name was Mario Friscone, and I worked for those guys, Nicholas General Contracting, for a long time, and he took me under his wing and taught me some other skills, framing, sheetrock.
So that's where you're starting to pick up your skill set now.
Yeah,
that you
more of my skill sets, and it just so happens that guy had a really rough childhood out in the Bronx when he was growing up, and you know, watched his father die, and like he just kind of seen something in me, man, and just came in and took me under his wing.
Wow.
You know?
Started teaching the trades.
Yeah, and I went to work with him for a while. So I was working for him when this fight broke out with me and my dad, and he found out, and you know, he's like, you know what, just you know, do the right thing, and you know, we'll have plenty of work for you. And that's when I first got out, and I stayed with my aunt for a couple months, and then Mario had an apartment for rent, and that was the first time in my life that I had my own place. And I just, you know, I was just trying to really hang on and help the family as much as I could.
Right.
But at the same time, there was this drug thing between all of us that, like, it was a comfortability that, you know, I knew that if I helped them with the rent, and I guess can't put it together. Like, it was just this thing we couldn't let go of, you know. And I didn't want to leave my sister. Many times I was like, I just couldn't leave.
Sounds like a lot of codependencies going on
Yeah,
there.
man.
You know, I mean,
Yeah,
where,
yeah.
you know, it was okay if everybody was in the same chaos, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
It wasn't chaos if everybody was there.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, so
yeah.
you kind of normalize that stuff. You kind of say to yourself, well, you know, we're all in this together. We're all doing the same thing, so it must be normal.
Well,
but it's not normal.
No,
I mean, if you were to stand outside and look in, I mean, when you look back at it now, you say to yourself, what the hell was going on here? You know,
man, it was madness. You know, you start to co-sign other people's shortcomings, you know, and you start to fall to the levels that we were all falling to.
Right.
Started to become like acceptable. And like we would walk by each other in the house and you could just see the defeat and we just accepted it.
Right,
You
right,
know what I
right.
mean? And it was just something that just had to happen.
So you're out now.
Yeah.
Mario's giving you work. You got your own place.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, things are starting to look a little better.
Yeah.
What goes on at this point? What, you know, when you have this independence?
Oh man, I was doing great. I wasn't sober, but I wasn't using like heroin and a lot of cocaine. I was still dabbling, but I had so much hope, right, at this point, right? I'm like set free from this madness and this nasty environment, right? And
But were you?
no, so you know what I mean? At that point, you know, the self takes over, you know. And my friend says, like, you know what, no matter where you go, there you are, you know what I mean? Like, so that's kind of what happened to me, you know, but I was working and doing great, and you know, I hadn't burned everything to the ground in New York yet. You know, I had, you know, my family, we got out of that. I had some good relationships. I had a lot of good guys around me that wanted to help me. And I started developing a lot of skills in the trades, plumbing, carpentry, and but I was drinking a lot.
That was that was what you preferred at that
Yeah,
point.
because it kept the other stuff away, you know, and it was my guys I worked with drank, you know what I mean? And
it was
just
acceptable.
Yeah, and I didn't think I was an alcoholic. I thought I was a drug addict, you know. And I met a beautiful woman at that time. Oh my God, she was beautiful, and she loved me to death, and she tried to love me, you know. But like I just couldn't stop partying, and you know, sooner or later, you know, I ended up getting high again.
Okay.
on that stuff. And just like my parents, man, I started to lose the jobs, lose the friends that I had working friends. Mario had to turn his back on me. The other boss had to turn his back on me, and I ended
Did you
up.
understand why they were doing it at that time, or were you angry at the time because it was
No,
happening?
I totally understood.
Okay,
I
all right.
totally
So you
understood.
knew where you were, and
Yeah.
you knew why things were happening.
I was more disappearing than like causing them too much trouble at that point.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I was more like losing everything and ending up sleeping in the truck kind of thing,
Right.
and just hiding from the world. And I
Got
just they no one understood. They were just looking at me with a complete astonishment, like, what is wrong with you? They tried, man. They tried their best. And I just couldn't get it right. And I lost a girl, right? Ended up, wasting her time and hurting her. And at that point, the habit got so bad, I started to, steal and lie and cheat and do
So
it.
now you get in some criminal behavior
Yep.
just to support your habits.
Yeah, yep. And ruined every relationship I ever had up here in Rockland. At this time, my dad was separated from my mom, and he was living in Hillburn, New York. And I would still get drugs from him, and whatever I could, I'd get drugs from her and stuff like that. And there was still that relationship going on. And I remember one time I got so bad at this point, I knocked on my dad's door, and he shut the door on me. When a guy like that shuts the door on you, you know what I mean? Like, oh, God, that was painful. And that's when I was just, I had a friend down the road from my dad. They would let me sleep on their porch for the warm season,
Right.
And it just so happened at that time I had got like a message on Facebook from my cousin in Texas. She must have heard. So I guess my mom or dad, somebody told them, like, hey, your freaking cousin's jacked up, man. Maybe you should come down there. And like, it was perfect timing. I had ruined everything I had up here, and no one would take my calls or.
So you moved to Texas.
Yep.
I did the same thing.
Did you?
When I was in college, I did the same thing. I went down there to make a bunch of money framing. It never materialized, just to let you know. But I lived in Houston for a while.
You never told me that.
Yeah, it's a
Man.
crazy story.
Yeah.
I was in college. I was at Geneseo. I mean, the best place you could ever be in the world. I mean, I was playing sports. I was doing good in school. It was 6 girls, every one guy. It was like heaven. For some reason, we got talked into between semesters that there was a bunch of money to be made in Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
And I went home on break, and I said to my father, hey, I'm going to Houston. And they were like, you're not going to Houston. You're going back to school. And I'm like, no, I'm going to Houston. I had 2 other buddies. They were committed. We were committed before we went home.
No talking you out.
No talking of that. Next thing I know, week before school starts, they both call me and they both back out. So I go to my father. Hey, listen, I'm thinking about changing my mind for Houston. He goes, you're not changing your mind. You're going to Houston. I said, really? Yeah. He goes, you're going. You said you were going. You put us through you're going to Houston. And it just so happens my brother had a friend who was framing houses down there. And I went down there, and, he was bipolar. Nobody bothered to tell me that, of course.
Yeah.
So we would find ourselves, hardly talking in the middle of the night. But he was a hard worker, and he knew what he was doing. And I had no clue what was going on. But he taught me, and we used to put up houses. They came with walls, and we, just 2 of us lift up these walls, and we were building these houses, one after another. And it was the boom in Houston. And, we didn't get paid for a couple of them, and I just said, I can't do this. Drove a truck for a while. And all the time, I was jacked up. I was built because I was working my ass off.
Yeah.
All the time I'm saying to myself, what a stupid ass. What are you doing down here in this heat, working when you could be up in Geneseo, living the lifestyle. So that went on for a while. Finally got on a plane, flew to New York, met my father there, and then flew to Buffalo and got back to school and said, thank God, I will never do something stupid like that again. But,
never knew that about
yeah,
you.
no, that's my trip to Texas. I lived off of Hillcroft and Westheimer in
I know
in
right
Houston,
where that's
Texas.
at. Yeah, I know where it's at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to play a lot of pool halls down
Oh,
there.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so.
yeah. It's a booming
So you
place.
go to Texas, right?
Yup.
And
Yup.
you end up with what company?
So a company called Oil States. But, I hop on the plane, right? My cousin was the only person talking to me. So I said, look, we'll buy you a ticket. And I didn't have much to take with me. I just had a book bag. I hop on the plane. And I remember being on that plane, man, swearing to God that I would never get high again or drink again. And I'm detoxing. I'm in horrible shape. I'm probably 130 pounds maybe.
Wow.
I'm beat up pretty bad. Still young enough to bounce back a little bit. But I got on the plane and I swore it off, man. I meant every word of it. I get there, my aunt lets me in. Now, I never met these people. They had no idea.
About your background or anything.
They
knew
knew-
your parents, though,
They
right?
knew my parents, but they never met me. I never laid eyes on them. They never laid eyes on me, and they didn't know how bad it was. They had no idea what was going on with mom and dad because families don't talk. They're not going to tell you. Brother-in-law, they're not going to tell you all that stuff. So poor people, man, And I get there, they let me in with loving arms, and I go to one of my first groups down there, and then ended up meeting people. I ended up drinking that night when I got there. I was so uncomfortable and detoxing so bad, I ended up just going to the store and getting a beer, and I just kind of just survived on some alcohol for a good 2 years probably. And I did a kitchen for a family friend of theirs. I did a bathroom. I did some tile work. And my skills that these men had taught me in my life basically kept me alive. I got my first car. I got a license down there. And I did a job for a guy, and this guy, he's a great guy, man. He just kept nagging me. He's like, I did some work for him, and he loved the work, and he just kept nagging me. You got to come check out our oil company. You got to. And he's like, do you know anything about it? I'm like, no, man. I wanted to be left alone, I came out of this mad.
Hellhole.
And I'm like, dude, I just want to do a little bit of work and be left alone, And he wouldn't let up. And one day, I think I got beat for like $500 on a job or something. And I was just annoyed at these people. And I said, the hell with this, man. Maybe he's right. I called him up and I said, Don, let's go look at this place. That day, he picks me up. And we went to a company called Oil States Inc. OSI, right? Yeah. Anyway, he pulled me on to the lot there, and it was just all this awesome oil field equipment, like pipelines, plets, pipeline end terminations, collet connectors, all this just cool stuff. And I was blown away. And I said, I'll try it, And I had a pretty extensive plumbing background at that time. And
Not on this stuff, though.
not on this stuff, but when I found out hydraulics is all feed and return, I just excelled pretty quick. I just blew past some of the guys that were there because I knew I knew the heating systems up here that they were teaching me, radiant heating systems with zone valves and mixing valves and all this stuff. And I had no idea how lucky I was. All those years, those guys are put in my life to teach me those skills, man. And now, looking back on it, I'm so grateful. So I excelled quick at that company, and at this time, I'm just drinking, I haven't moved out of my aunt's house.
No more drugs, just alcohol.
No more drugs, just alcohol. I had no drug connections or nothing, and I wanted it that way, But alcohol started to take its toll too,
Right.
I started, really like drinking a lot, maybe a pint of vodka a day,
Wow.
I was drinking a lot, and not at work and stuff like that, but like after work, I was pretty much drinking myself to sleep because I couldn't sleep either, I had all this past in my head,
Wow,
my head
yeah.
was not like okay, I was really hiding from a lot of stuff, and I didn't see it at the time. I see it now. So I started working for this company, man, and I did really well. They liked me, and the offshore manager. Now, mind you, I'm just working on land. I'm working in a big warehouse, right, like an assembly line, and the offshore manager came to me and said, "Hey, listen, man, you're really kind of moving quick here. We want to see if you want to come to the service department." I had no idea what that was, so I met him, and kind of a lot like the meeting I had with you. He's come to my office on this day. I went to his office, and at this point, man, it's real important for me to say, like, I still had hope that, like, the right job, like the right situation, maybe the right girl, like something was still going to fix me. I knew at this point something seriously wrong with me. I just
Right,
couldn't.
you were looking for something else to fix you instead of fixing yourself.
Yeah, and I believed it would. You know, I was like, man,
As long as things line up correctly,
man,
I'll be okay.
Be okay, you know? And this guy comes to me and he's sitting me in office and he's telling me all these, like, look, we're going to send you around the world. You're going to install this equipment that you're building, you know, and we're going to pay you this much. And I remember sitting in that chair like, this is it. This is what's going to give me a life worth living, right? And I believed it. I walked out of that office high on the cloud as you could be, right? And I was so psyched, man. And they brought me into the service department that week and started training me on some of their stuff. And they had sent me overseas like a week later. And I started traveling the world, man, installing this pipeline equipment.
You told me at one point in the past that this was under ocean, this
Subsea pipeline equipment.
Okay.
Yeah,
so they would repair something along the line. You would repair pipe under.
So basically, what was going on at that time, there was a lot of work in Brazil. So Petrobras is a company that was basically a government-run company that was like a Shell or an Exxon here, right?
Right.
They were just building a ton of pipelines underwater for natural gas. So what my company really offered was the ability to give these companies like Petrobras or Shell or Exxon the ability to do these subsea pipeline connections without a welder. Because at this point, they're starting to go way deep. You know, they're 4,000, 6,000 feet deep anymore.
Wow.
So, you know, back in like when you were in Texas, there's a lot of those rigs that are close to shore. We used to fly out the helicopter out of the heliports, and you would see all the old rigs.
Right.
And as years went on, the rigs are getting out there more and more and more. They're just going out, man.
Right.
So at this point, this company's giving these companies the ability to make these connections. You know, like you take a 24-inch pipe, steel pipe, and they would have a spool on the back of a boat, and this spool would be 300-400 feet tall by 300-400 feet wide, and they would just lay it out on the ground floor like spaghetti. And basically, my company would sell them the connectors to where they could drop this connector in the water, line it up with an ROV, remote operated vehicle, line it up, and basically give them the ability to make that seal without a welder.
Wow.
So I was the guy.
So it was like a class, like a pressure
it's a
piece?
collet.
Okay.
Imagine like a Chinese handcuff.
Okay.
So these collets had hydraulic pistons around them. And basically, I was the hydraulic technician, so I would build the collet connectors. I knew how they worked. I knew how they were put together. I knew what would go wrong with them. When you start sending equipment that deep, you know, you start dealing with a lot of pressures, right?
Of course, yeah.
So I knew how that all operated, and you know, I would be the guy in the ROV room with the ROV pilots, and I would say, hey, listen, open valve C to 3,500 PSI, close latch at this time, let that pressure drop, and I knew what to tell them on how to make that connection.
Okay.
So it was a really cool job. It was.
Yeah,
and
sounds pretty cool.
It was a great experience, and I was good at it for summer. I was just good at it. I'd be up. I could stay up for days and work on it, and it gave me more importantly, like it gave me these moments when I'd be out to shore on these boats, completely sober, completely away from alcohol,
with no access to alcohol.
no access to alcohol, no access to drugs, you know, and I would party like an animal when I was on shore. I'd go on these boats and I'd detox for a couple of days and I'd bounce back. And maybe I was a bit of a version of the real Corey at that moment. I don't know, you know, but I did really good at my job and I traveled the world, man. You know?
Yeah, they flew you pretty much all over the place, right?
Yeah.
You were telling me that after a certain amount of hours, they had to fly you first class to these places?
Oh, that place, Amsterdam. Yeah, that was a trip because that was towards the end of my career.
Okay.
And I'll never forget the face on that flight attendant, man. She just knew what time it was. They flew me to Amsterdam because they didn't want to pay me to work over there. They would fly me there and fly me back. Now, I did 6 trips there. So that's 12 flights, right? There and back, right? And that was the first year. And I was just drinking so much because there was no work on. I was just walking around Amsterdam, and there's another place I forget and over there in the Netherlands. And she would see me come on that plane. She's like, "Nah, just go to the back." And she gave me my own seat in the back to fucking pass out every time. And she's like, we can't even put you in front of these people. Just go in the back, you know. And that was towards the end of it. But at this time, yeah, I'm traveling the world and I'm drinking a lot. And you know, like always in my life, you know, the wheels start coming off. I started doing cocaine again at that time. And I just, I was in Brazil, roaming the streets, buying cocaine,
When you were working for them?
Yeah, while I was working for them, I started
So
partying.
did it come to a certain point where they said, "Okay, Corey, we see what's going on," and
Took a while.
it took,
Took
yeah,
a
I'm
while,
sure it took a
like
while.
5 years.
You weren't in front of them,
Yeah.
so but it did come to that point where
Oh, yeah.
they recognized that this wasn't going to work,
Yeah.
because they couldn't trust you, or they couldn't make sure that you were going to do what you had to do because of the
Yeah.
habits.
Yep. Yeah. Turns out, I was in Brazil one time. I was stuck over there because I think it was Hurricane Harvey had hit Houston, and I was stuck over there for a bit longer than I needed to. I was over there for like 4 months, right? Long time. I was on a boat before that for 90 days.
Right, which is a long time.
And I was just like done, And as soon as I got off land, I just started partying. As soon as I got off that 90-day trip on the boat, I started partying again. And, it got so bad that like some of the locals were like, they know you're working for an oil company. They see it's not, you're only American on the freaking island, There was no high, like, I don't know who I thought I was as getting away with this. And someone called back, someone called the company from Brazil and said, hey, this guy's out of line. And it's the best thing they ever did, best thing could ever happen to me. They called me. I finally got back because of the hurricane, and they called me into the office, and you could tell that guy was heartbroken. What a good guy. And he said, listen, man, we know what's going on. We got to give you a drug test. Can you pass the drug test? And I said, no. And I didn't even want to take the drug test because it could ruin your oil field career. They catch you like that. And he said, do you want help? And I said, no, man, I don't want any. I just wanted to be left alone. I was so tired at that point. And I just walked, I told him I didn't want any help, and I resigned, right? That's the best move I could make at that point. And I cashed in my 401k. And at this point, you got to remember my mindset, right? Nothing was working, right? I still had all this anger and resentment from childhood. I was failing as a man, right? I couldn't build a life. You talk about from the dark to the light, right? Like, I really believed that like job or that money or that prestige or that cool thing, that cool job I had was going to fix me. I was completely stuck in the dark about so many things. My drug addiction had me by the throat, and nothing was working.
Did you ever go to see somebody, talk to somebody about it, or it was something where you said, I don't need anybody. I can fix this myself if I try. But you realize at this point that you're not fixing it.
Yeah.
So, what are your options at this point?
I remember knowing, I had an intuitive knowing that I was going to lose everything again. When I lost the job, but I still had an apartment. I had a nice truck. I knew the track. I knew the story. Like, I knew it was over. And but I still had like this belief that I was going to somehow bounce back. So I didn't accept the help they wanted to offer. They probably would have sent me to one of the best.
Yeah, right. Big company like that.
Yeah, man. They would probably really would have took care of me. And but I needed to go this route, man. God needed me to see that nothing was working. Corey's way wasn't working, right? And I basically cashed in my 401k and drank and drugged myself to death in my apartment for about 6 months. And at that point, I'm not showering. I'm walking to the corner store. I'm getting my drugs delivered. I'm burning through all my money. I had bought my dad. I had enough money. I bought my dad a truck. I bought my mom a car. I bought my sister a car. And that was my way of telling them, hey, leave me alone now.
Right.
I wanted to die. I wanted to just be left alone until I hit a bottom that I needed to hit, I guess. And that's what I did, and I lost that place. I ended up sleeping in my truck for a couple of weeks. And my mother, good old mom, right? She was still like knew something was wrong with me.
It's a mother always a mother.
I'm telling you, man, she kind of knew I was ready for some reason. She called me one day and she's like, listen, I can tell you're ready. She goes, why don't you just get some help? And I was like, all right, Mom, let's do this, And
Was she still doing drugs at this time?
she was, but she was on a drug called Suboxone.
Yeah, Suboxone. Yeah.
So she was basically, that's as like that's as good as it can. It's really good for a woman who had her disease, and she was probably living some of the best years of her life at that time. She was so much better. So she was actually in a place to help her son, which was amazing, right? And she just knew I was ready, and she ended up getting a hold of a guy who owned a sober house in Houston, Texas, and she had bought me a hotel room for that night. She didn't have much money, but she had enough money to buy me a hotel room. And she got a hold of this guy. He called me up, and I remember just being in a hotel room, scared to death of the world, man. Like my mind was going at that point. I was very delusional, very, I was just not okay. Very antisocial, very full of fear, and just very, very sick. Suicidal, right?
So this is the first time you actually venture into a rehab.
Yeah, man.
Okay, so
yeah.
all this going on, it never crossed your mind to say, okay, I need help. I'm going to go into rehab with all these rehabs around and stuff like that. So now your mother reaches out, gets you in a position where you're going to go into the rehab, and you finally say to yourself, okay, I do need help. I'm going to go into a rehab.
Yeah. Well, there was a rehab stint when I lived up here, St. Christopher's.
Okay. So, you were at St. Christopher's?
Yeah, I went to St. Christopher's.
How long were you there?
About 34 days.
Okay.
Yeah. But I still didn't believe I had a problem. I didn't believe I needed God's help for that goes. Like I didn't believe that.
And that has a very religious basis to it.
Yeah.
St. Christopher's.
Amazing place.
Yeah,
amazing
I'm very
place.
familiar with it, and
Yeah.
it's right here. What's Peekskill? What's it?
Graymore.
Yeah, Raymore.
Yeah.
Graymore is
Yeah.
But I think it's right up in Cold
Garrison.
Springs.
Garrison.
Right.
Amazing place.
Right.
I wasn't ready though. But anyway, when I was ready, my mom knew it, and this guy called me over the phone, the owner of the house, right? And it was the first time in my life that he didn't say nothing about God. He didn't say nothing about like recovery. He didn't say nothing about and he just started talking to me about his drinking and drugging. And he started telling me how it was and what it was like. And he started telling me all the women that he had in his life that loved him to death. Talked about the wife that loved him and tried to talk about the family that tried to. And he talked about all the money he made and how he still was hopeless and that still didn't fix the problem. And he talked about everything that he lost. And like for the first time in my life, I knew without a doubt this guy had what I had, right? Like I was like, okay, this guy is hitting it right on the head. Because he had explained all the things he thought would work and all the things that didn't and all the family and all the things that, like, human stuff. And he's like, yeah, man, I'm sorry to say, but you're in a bad spot. And he had no solution for me. He didn't give me a solution or nothing like that. He didn't give me any hope. He just told me the truth, man. And I had never met him. I was just on the phone listening to him. And I remember saying to him, I was like, I don't understand, dude. I got all these skills. I can use my hands. What is wrong with me? He goes, you got a deadly illness, man. And he goes, if you got what I got, it's going to get worse. And I remember when he said that, I'm like, how much worse can it get,
Yeah, right.
And he said, listen, he goes, we got a bed open. Why don't you come check us out? And at that point, like, that's a pretty scary proposition. I'm stuck in a hotel room. I'm like 130 pounds, soaking wet. I'm full of fear. I'm shaking in my own skin. I got to drive all the way to the other side of Houston to get to this house. I got no money. I had an F-250 jacked up on like 35 tires. One tire was a spare tire, so it was sitting like this on the front. I had broken mirrors on both sides of the truck. All my mirrors were broke off. All I had was a rear view mirror. And I said, fuck it. I hopped in the truck and I drove across Houston, and I just made it to the house. It was on E, and they let me in. And they took me in. They got me a bed. I remember seeing this house, man. It saved my life, but it was just so dirty and nasty. Everybody was all like, they just looked like hell. It was a bunch of drug addicts just stuck in this house.
It's amazing how you can look at things. You're actually in that position yourself, but your view on things are totally different.
You can't see
You're
the
delusional.
truth.
You're looking at it from a different this perspective that says all these people are dirty, the house is dirty, and meanwhile
I'm sleeping
you're
in my truck.
Chaos.
Yeah.
With broken mirrors. But it doesn't affect you the same way.
I couldn't see
it.
it.
Always amazed me with human beings the way they can, visualize things without actually looking at themselves.
I was so lost, man. I was so lost. I couldn't. My reality was just so far gone, and they took me in, and I hated it. but it was the first time in my life that I was beat up enough to not run, you know. And I remember just sitting in these kitchens. They had these meetings every night, Tuesday nights and Thursday nights, and I just remember sitting in this kitchen, like, they might be right. They might be right. You know, I might have like a deadly illness.
How long were you there?
I was there about a year and a half.
Was it religious based?
No.
It was
just,
basically a program. Was it an AA program? What
It
type
was
of
a 12-step program.
12-step
I'll say
program?
that. Yeah, 12-step program, and you know, and that was mandatory. You know, there was no like I'm just gonna hang out and put on some weight and eat right.
So if you were there, you had to make these meetings. There was no,
Mandatory,
and
yeah.
you know, you had to be in attendance. You had to,
Yeah.
you had to be there, accountable
Yeah.
to these guys. And if you weren't, they were going to ask you to leave the house.
Yeah, the guys who owned it were just like they were just really great men, and there was the kind of guys like you just don't bullshit, you know, and there was no bullshit in them, you know. They had been this route, they had went down the road I went down, and there was you couldn't tell them anything that they didn't already experience, and I just knew that for some reason. I just, you know, I could just recognize that these were not the kind of guys that were going to be fooled, and I just accepted their help. And there was a guy named Tim Stacks there, an old crackhead with like missing teeth. He was like a gorilla though. He was fit as can be. He was missing his teeth. His hands were like the size of basketballs, man. And he was the house manager. And you know, that was the first man in my life that was telling me some truth that hurt, you know. And he saved my life. That guy. I tried finding him. He's not doing good. He was the kind of guy that just could never stay sober.
Right.
But he saved my life, man. And that guy took me under his wing, and he started teaching me about my problem, and just started to like mentor me in some areas, you know. And I started to understand, you know. And
So you're there a year and a half.
yeah.
And you're in Houston. You decide to. At what point do you decide to leave, and what made you leave that particular place? Do they have a time limit?
No,
Did they say
they didn't have a time limit. What happened around this time is I relapsed in that home.
Oh, in the home.
Yeah, I relapsed in the home. You know, I had got a girlfriend. I started making some money again. I got a good job again, and you know, I got some health back, and you know, the girl that I was dating, she relapsed, and basically, I still had that belief that like something outside of myself was going to work, you know, and I figured if I just had the girl and the job again, had some money in my pocket, I really still wasn't. I was still in the dark, you know. I really didn't know really what was going to save me, right? I was still delusional, and I relapsed when she relapsed, and my mother had got cancer around like the same week.
Wow.
And my mother called me and said, "Hey, listen, man, I got stage 4 cancer, and it's not good, and you need to come home." And I had relapsed, and I had to leave that place.
Come home to Rockland.
Come home to Rockland. So here I am coming home from all these years in Texas, losing everything, and I was supposed to be coming home a sober man from my mother, you know, and I was just heartbroken because I knew I was screwed, man. Like there's, at that age, at that point.
How old were you at this point?
I was 34, 35
Okay.
at that point.
So you've been through some stuff, you know. You
Yeah.
did some traveling.
Yeah.
You had quite a bit of life experience
Yeah.
under your belt, and you're coming home back to Rockland where the chaos was originated.
Yeah, very scary situation. You know, I had done a lot of wrong up here, you know. I'd done a lot of wrong down there too, but I had to come back here, and my mother had cancer, and I relapsed, you know, and I was using the whole trip up. I had just enough money to get back, and I just remember just feeling so defeated, man. Like I got to go back home and look these people in the face, and you know, basically, you know, there was no lying to my mom. You know, she's my mother. She knew. She's like, you're still the same, you know, and that's a really painful thing, you know, because at that point I still believe that I'm a weak man. You know, I really thought I was just a weak man. I thought that that's just as good as I'm ever gonna be able to be.
So you were defeated at that point.
Defeated,
you were actually coming to terms that this was going to be Corey Wray for the rest of your life, as long as you know you could hold it together, as long as you're going to live.
Yeah, man.
And I'm sure you've seen many people die along the way. You know that you know, just in that business, we've both seen people not make it. So
it's amazing.
I mean, you've witnessed that yourself. But at this point, the the illusion that something is going to come and save you, it disappears.
Oh,
And you come to terms with, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get out of it.
Yeah, it's defeating because everyone you look in the eye and every encounter you have with another human being, and that another human being that's respectable and like has a life, and has some dignity and like has something that you just don't got. Like I would look in people's eyes and I'd be like, I'm missing something, like why can't I get there, And that's where I was. I was defeated, and I was just along for the ride again. It's really like it's just like something's got you by the throat. And at that point, like I know there's nothing going to fix me. I had already had the job. I'd already had some money, and I was just like I already had good women and like friends that tried to help me, and I was just trying to hold it together for my mother the best I could until
So you
she
come
passed.
home, your mother has stage 4 cancer.
Yeah.
And she's disappointed. You're disappointed. You're both disappointed in Corey.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So what happens with your mother? Does your mother survive? Does she?
No,
survive?
she passed. She passed, and it was horrible because all those years of like when I said, like my stepfather came into the picture. Our relationship when he came into the picture really got not good because. He was a drug addict. He didn't know how to raise a kid, and like, he would tell her things like, don't hug that kid, don't coddle that kid. Like, so our relationship was just torn apart from a very young age. And you throw the drug history in on that, we just were not. There was a tension there that was just so painful, man. And I had to hold it together, and she had to try her best to act like that tension wasn't there, and I had to try to act like that tension wasn't there because we knew she was dying. And there was just no way to make it right, and I did the best I could, and I watched her die.
And at this point, you say to yourself, okay, I wasn't able to make it right before she passed.
Oh, yeah. That's
so
what happened.
There's a ton of guilt that starts to drip in there.
Yeah. And that's what happened.
You're back in Rockland.
Yeah. And at that point, at this point, when I had went to one more rehab before she died. That's how fast.
Up here?
Yeah, that's how fast the drug addiction started to take over. Because I had come back from Texas. I was here probably 6 months, and I was already in another rehab.
Lexington or?
No, I went to Blaisdell.
Oh, yeah, Blaisdell.
Yeah. I checked myself into Blaisdell. Okay. At this point, I was hoping to check myself in and just be able to walk out and stay sober. At this point, I really believed that as long as I made the choice not to drink or I'd be all right, and I really wanted it, and I just couldn't get it. And I walked into Blaisdell. I stayed there for 34 days, whatever it was, and I got on Suboxone while I was there. It's a medication.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
And I went that whole route. I couldn't get off of the Suboxone. I ended up, the Suboxone stopped working, like because
Yeah, when we met, you were still on Suboxone.
No. When we met, I was on some antidepressants.
Okay, right.
Which probably saved my life.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so I woke up one morning. Now I'm out of rehab. My mom's got some hope. She's dying. She's going through chemo. She's losing her hair, all that kind of stuff. And one day I wake up and I said, this ain't enough. That night I'm shooting cocaine, and
you must have known where to get all this stuff all the time.
Now I'm back in Rockland, so all the family, friends, like everybody's getting high, it's just that. It's just that.
Back to the chaos.
Yeah, it's just there, and everybody sees me trying to hang on, and they just can't wait till I give in, So they're like, "Oh, he's ready."
Misery loves company.
I'm telling you, man, and that's the way it was, And I gave in, and then it was like another, she died. I'm shooting cocaine, and it's just getting ugly and nasty, and I went through 3 more rehabs.
Local?
Yeah, local. Okay. Resource Recovery of Orange County, Good Samaritan, Nyack.
Were they 30-day rehabs?
Yeah, 28, 30 days.
Yeah, right, yeah.
She passed, and I got out of that last rehab, man, and I just knew that I couldn't make any decisions. You know, I said, I'm done.
What was the last one?
Good Samaritan.
Good Sam. So you were there for 28 days?
28 days.
Which is a program they have there, and, you know, that's all they can give you, and
Yeah.
they boot everybody out prematurely at 28 days thinking they've accomplished a miracle, but that miracle
Yeah.
really very
Yeah.
rarely exists.
Yeah, very, yeah. I walked out of there, and but that's where I had met the doctor who basically put me on antidepressants.
Okay.
You know, I couldn't sleep. You know, at this point, I'm 38, 39, maybe, 30, somewhere around there. So you're talking about all those years of damage and debris. I was full of guilt, I was full of shame, I was full of fear. I wasn't living right. I had done so many horrible things, couldn't sleep. You know, the head is just a monster. And this doctor knew exactly what to do, dude. God bless him. And he put me on some antidepressants and some antipsychotics for sleep. And it really helped me. I was on that. So it was the first time in my life that I took medications from a doctor that you couldn't abuse, right?
Right.
And it worked. You know, I was on that for about a year and a half, and then one day I was in CVS, and I'm sitting in the CVS line, and I says, "To hell with this." I felt like cattle. You know, I felt like I was just being like in line, just a zombie. And I said, "This ain't the man God intended me to be, man." And I walked right off of everything. And I got 100% medication free for the first time in my life since I took that pill I was telling you about, and I've been medication free ever since. And
So when we met, how did you left Good Sam, which was your last rehab? Did you hear about Rockland Recovery's leaving Good Sam?
Yeah.
So tell me how you heard about Rockland Recovery, because I never asked you about that. We just had met, you know.
Yeah. I had an awesome counselor who was with me.
What's the name?
Lauren.
Okay.
Lauren Mangoli from Daytop.
Okay.
She was with me every rehab since I came back from Texas. She was with me through every relapse, and that she just like never left. You know? So I'm in Good Sam, and she called my counselor. She's like, "Yo, listen, there's this really cool place in Rockland Recovery Homes." Because at this point, I still want to run. Like I'm going back. In my mind, I'm going back to Texas. Mom's dead. I'm out of here.
Right.
Like I'm going back to make some money. I'll be fine. You know. I still had that going on, but I was just broken enough to listen to people. And she says, "Listen, man, there's this place called Rockland Recovery Homes. You know, I think you should try it out."
Which wasn't in existence too much longer before this happened.
Yeah, it was almost like perfect timing.
Right.
Yeah. So I said, "No, Lauren, man, I got to get out of here. You don't understand. I can't stand it here. I did a lot of dirt here. I need to get out of Rockland." She goes, "Listen to me, Corey. You need to plant some roots." She goes, "You need to sit still. You need to try this." And I was like, "All right." You know, and I went to Rockland.
So she convinced you to go to Rockland.
Yeah, she convinced me.
And you met? Did you meet Steve first? Steve was
I met Willie first.
okay.
Met Willie
Okay,
first.
the house manager.
Yep. Then I met Steve, and they let me in, and you know, I had started, you know, really working a 12-step recovery program, and really started to do, you know, things that I haven't done before. You know, I was just at a place where, like, I really was at a place where I did my best to stop making decisions. I knew I was in trouble, big trouble, and I just knew that I just really had to trust these people that were put in my life, and that's what I did, and you know, and that's where everything started to really take a turn for the better.
At what point does faith come into play here? You know, because we've talked about faith before and how important it is to give over some of that will that you have to somebody higher that, you know, really has control. So at what point did you start getting faith involved in your recovery?
So you remember that guy Tim Stacks I told you about?
Yeah.
He was. That's when it happened. Like, and even though I didn't stay sober at that point, there was a guy who lived at that sober house, an older man, bad alcoholic, and this poor guy was really trying. And he had told the owners of the house that he was going to tile the bathroom floor upstairs for some money off his rent because he had lost his job. Sweetheart of an old man, just trying to make some money, right? And he tried to tile that floor and he couldn't. He was messing up the tile and everything. And he came to me and he said, "Corey, can you help me tile the floor?" And I was so pissed off that this guy asked me. I didn't want to help him. I was doing my own thing. And I remember walking around the house bitching about this guy asking me to help him, this old man, right? And Tim Stacks heard me, and he let me bitch and complain, and I'll never forget this day for the rest of my days. He came up to me and he said, Corey, he goes, you're a selfish son of a bitch. He goes, did you ever think how lucky you are to have a stepfather in your life to teach you skills to help you survive? And this poor old man who has no skills at all asks you to help him, and you're so selfish and self-centered you can't help this man. And I was just, my heart was torn out of my chest. And he was so right. And it was the first time in my life I was able to see that there was some kind of good in my life working. You know, I was like, the way he said it, you know, like, and I realized that I had my stepfather, I had Mario, and I was like, fuck. You know, so I helped the guy. And I felt good after I helped him,
right?
You know, and that's when I started to develop like some kind of faith, you know. But it still took a long time to take root.
So we're up here in Rockland now at Rockland Recovery Homes, and you know, I know you're going to program because you have to go to program. I know you were still on the psychotic medicine at the time when I met you. So this is a house. So people know that we had purchased up in Montebello, big house. We had probably, how many guys we have there? 13, 14 guys?
Yeah, one time, anywhere from 13 to 15 at all times,
And we were in the process of actually building out. The state gave us a house here in Letchworth, and we were building out the women's shelter because there was no women's shelters or women's recovery homes in Rockland. And you came in and you were doing work on that. So, you know, it kind of, at that point you wanted to be useful. You had the skills. You knew you had the skills, and we needed those skills to get that place. I mean, nobody had been in it for almost 30 years.
Yeah, it was a mess.
It was a mess.
And at that time, like the faith, you know, I had all these experiences going up. Even though I didn't stay sober, I had that guy Tim Stacks and other things. And you know, I had started to, you know, I started to work these steps, right, that they're talking about, this recovery, this 12-step recovery. And I started to just do what was asked of me, man. And for the first time in my life, I started to seek, like, you know, a God, right, a power greater than myself, man. And that looks different for everybody. And it's scary, and it's like something you don't trust. And like I thought for a long time it was like a way of weakness, you know. I'm like, you guys just can't beat this on your own. Like, I had these ideas, right? And I also believe that if there was a God, he wanted nothing to do with me, man. You know, I had that belief too. And I started to really seek that instead of what Corey thought Corey needed to be okay. And when I started to do that, it was like everything started to fall into place. I started to meet certain people. I started to learn how to just be okay inside, you know, and I started to get some relief from all the pain, and I wrote inventory and stuff like that, and I had made amends to my mother, even though she died. It was real powerful, and that's when I knew without a doubt. I knew without a doubt after all those experiences with Tim Stacks, and sitting with a guy and talking to another guy who had the same problem as me. I knew without a doubt that there was a God that's concerned with me. And was going to guide, you know, and everything. And it was really just like living by spiritual principles, man. You know?
So instead of fighting it and trying to be in control, and you know, you kind of gave up that and let a higher authority say to you, okay, let's go with the flow. Let's go with what's going to happen here, and you know, I'll take care of you. You know, you don't need to fight me all the time. So I saw that in you when I met you. I felt like you were like, you know, I'm not making these decisions. I'm letting these decisions come to me. I'm letting my life come to me for a change. When I met you, it was like, you know, I mean, I'm not fighting this. This is a good opportunity for me to get my skills back into work. And you know, you obviously had them. Plus, a number of other guys you were working with had skills too. So it was pretty neat that we had, you know, 3 or 4 guys from the house really renovate that entire house, and it was no small job. And that's when I met you, walking in there, because we would walk in there once in a while and just see how the progress was going. And I saw, most of you, all four of you have a skill set that I was amazed the way you guys were going through that house. And, that's when we had talked, and, I said, I remember like it was yesterday, you were in the house, and I called you out. I said, come on out here and talk to me. You were the only guy I think I had a truck. Maybe Brendan had a truck too. But you had a truck that was beat up, and and you came out, and we started talking, and I basically said, I don't even know why I said it, only because I've done this with other people. I said, you're obviously skilled. I mean, you have a lot of skills, and I don't even know why I would think you would go from that to this. But I said to you, did you ever think about starting your own business? And you looked at me like a deer in the headlights. You were like, what?
Yeah.
And I said, and I even got to the point where I'm like, what are you, fucking nuts asking that question? At this point, he's in full-blown recovery. But I stayed with it, and I said to you, why don't you just come and see me? And, here's my office. I knew you could get there, which is always a problem in the stage of things. And we met. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday, where, you would walk in and you still, you were there, but you really were like, okay, I'm going to go there. I could see it in your mind. I'm going to go there. Nothing's going to happen, but I ain't doing anything else, so I'm also just
That's it.
I know that's what you felt like.
Yeah.
So I had a big job in front of me just to convince you that, this was real.
Yeah.
So I said, so, what do you think about going into business for yourself? And you said, I gotta get this, I gotta get that. I said, well, give me all the things you got to do that you can't do about this. Give me all those excuses. Remember me saying that? I want all of them. Don't leave any out. And you gave them all to me, and it was probably a list of 6 or 7 legitimate ones.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, if all those excuses disappear, would you be willing to do that? And you said, oh, because you didn't think for a second they would.
Yeah.
And you said, yeah, I'd do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then we clicked them off one by one. We clicked them off. The license. I remember like yesterday, this, that, and the other thing. And you stood there and I almost in a way and say, oh, fuck, man, why did I say I would do this? These get clicked away. But they did get clicked away. And we met a bunch of times after that. And you started your journey towards the light.
Yeah, man. Yeah. It happened just like that, And at that point, I had really started to believe in like something bigger than myself, And I had faith, and I just knew that if I lived right and really followed through with this, and like there was no doubt in my mind that these people were being put in my life to help me, and I had at that point, like I was really ready to work and put in everything I had. Like there was no more like half-assing anything or giving up.
You were still scared.
I was scared. Oh yeah, I was still scared.
To go into that from where you were into this, it was still a very heavy lift, and you were scared. But I believe you were at the point where you wanted to make a difference in your own life, and that the timing just happened to be correct at this point. You had the skill sets, you had the bare necessities to do it, and we just happened. God put us together, and you went forward with it, and you did all the heavy lifting, you did all the work to get it going, and so you're starting to get yourself going here. You're still in the house. What goes on at this point?
So I started working with you, and like this whole story I just told you, there was, I had finally come to terms and like a little bit of peace and truth. Like I was really in the dark and delusion about a lot of things, and I had really done some work in that area, and I started to really see like, I was so blessed, all the things that my parents taught me and all the mentors I had, and I really started to see like, the universe wasn't against me, and I was in my own way, and I really started to understand that at a deeper level, and I had met you, and the timing was perfect, and I just started to take direction, and but at that point, I'm still like, you always talk about that cup, right? Like you're still in the cup, like you really can't see out, you know? And I remember when I first met you, I didn't like you, man. I was like,
Well,
this guy,
you
guy, you came in, because at that, I remember I was amazing. You came in and you told us the truth, man. And like, thank God I was ready to hear it. And we needed to hear it because not everybody's doing that to guys like us in the situation. You know, they're coddling us and they're telling us it's going to be okay and they're telling us to do this or that, you know. And you were like, this is not normal. This is not normal. You guys are better than this. You can do this, this, and this. And I was just like, does he know what the hell is going on here? And then we met a few more times and I started sitting down with you and I had complete faith that I was in the right seat. And man, at that point, you got to remember, I hadn't had my own place for almost 7 years. The last place I had on my own was in Texas, and
right.
that was a debacle. It was a mess. And I had we had a plan, right? And we at that point I was broke. I had no license. I had no hope. I mean, I had hope, but I didn't have any direction. Like I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, you know. And it's funny, all my life I was trying to get away from what I was taught as a kid. I started working with my dad when I was like 10, and I really started working when my mom got locked up. And all those years, I was taught all these skills, and I was trying to run from, I just never thought it was good enough, you know. And I meet you, and I get this, I end up doing the same thing he taught me. It's just pretty powerful.
It's you're lucky because you had those skills, and those are things that you were taught at a young age, and those are gifts that you were given that you never really even realized they were gifts. But because you had those skills, you had a way out.
Yeah.
And what I see in this field more than anything is the inability to get beyond the system. Okay, and we've talked about this a bunch of times, and you know, I've worked with a lot of guys, and you know, they're in the system, you know, whatever that means. But for them to get out of the system, they have to have a plan. They have to have steps to go through. They have to have different plateaus to meet and be accountable. And the system doesn't require that. The system lets you exist in this fake world. Yep. And when I came into the house, I was like, nah, this is not the way this is going to work. Okay, so either you're going to be accountable, or you're not going to be accountable. And you took to that. So did a couple other guys. Yeah. You know, and I was grateful for that because I didn't know what was going to happen, but we were able to work together, and you established yourself in business, and you put those skills to work, and you basically you're responsible for building this whole studio. Just to fast forward. But there's other things that came to you in the process, and that was to see outside of your world that you didn't do. And, just for one thing, relationships, your own apartment. So talk about the good things that have come from when you finally came to terms with your own shortcomings and gave it to somebody else, the religious basis that you've developed over the years, and see, when I talk to guys, it's wild because once you do the little things that are tough, all this is hard stuff. None of it's easier. But once you do little ones, it's almost naturally the other ones will come to you. And I think you've experienced that. Instead of doing this, guys in chaos, everything they do, it's one step, and you're wondering why the sky's falling on your head because you're just doing one thing less than you're supposed to. But when you reverse that, things gravitate towards you now. The work, okay, so explain how that works. Because people, they don't understand that, positive thoughts and positive actions bring positive results. And they start to stack on each other. And I want you to talk about that, how it happened in your life. Yeah, so at that point, I'm being held accountable, like we talked about, right? And that cycle, that trap, that system that you're talking about is like, it's hard to see out of that. They got you locked in on medications. They got you locked in on food stamps. They're paying your rent. Like, I'm watching this all happen around me in all these sober homes and all these places for guys that have my problem. And I'm just like, there's no way out, right. And at that point, everything had lined up, and I realized that
it was going to be, I was going to have to be accountable to myself. And also, thank God I met a guy like you who held me to some accountability and supported me along the way. And I started to really understand that there was a way out. Like, there was a way to buy my own groceries and not have the state buy them. There was a way to get off these medications. And when I started to really do the small things like you talked about, like I started to do the right thing, I started to really get up every morning and put in effort that I really wasn't putting in. I started researching stuff. I started really taking hold of my own situation. But all the while, I really had faith too. Like, you go to God, prayer, meditation, all those things that we talk about. And I started to get out of it. And I started to really see, like, oh, wait a minute, this is possible. I moved out, right? First time in 7 years I had my own place. I remember the first night I slept in my own bed. I was like, it was weird. You know, I was like, man, this has been a long time.
I remember the first time we went into the apartment. I brought you a coffee maker or something over, and you were like, it was almost uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know, that you were in your own place. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
When Brian leaves here tonight, I'm going to be here by myself in my own place, which I haven't been, like you said, 7 years.
Yeah.
There's a sense of, like, do I really belong here? And I saw that in your face when you were there. And I said to you, don't worry, you'll get used to it.
Yeah.
And you did. I mean, you probably wouldn't want it any other way at this point.
Yeah, it's a blessing. And that, and I moved out and I started to, everything started to fall. I started to do the right thing. And I started to be able to pay my own bills and make my own way. And I built a life of discipline, right, and hard work and accountability, like we talk about, man. And I really started to put my best into just being a decent man, a good man, and the freedom to not have to be stuck in that system today is amazing. Like, yes, I have my own business, and like that's a we can get into that, but like being able to know that I can go home to my own place and rest my head on something that I worked hard for and no longer be stuck in that system,
You said something very profound to me when we went back to the old house that somebody else owns now. Lexington owns that house. Yeah. And you said, I'm going to do a talk at the house. Do you mind coming? And I said, no, I'll be happy to come in. And when we talked to all the guys. All the guys came up to us. They were, thrilled. We're going to call you. We'll, definitely want to talk to you. Hopefully give us some direction. I don't think anybody ever called me. I don't know if they ever called you.
Yeah.
But I remember you walking out of there, and you just said, "Thank God." I'm like, "Well, what happened?" He goes, "Thank God I'm not in here anymore."
Yeah.
And it was such a relief to you that you had left that.
Yeah.
And you felt sorry for them because they really didn't know. They
have no idea.
They have no idea where they actually are in life. And you were there once, so you know.
Yeah.
So it was when you said that to me, I was like, "Thank God, what?" Are you good? And you said, "Thank God I'm not here anymore," because you were in that house.
Yeah.
That's where we actually had met.
Yeah.
We don't own that house anymore, but that's where we had met.
Yeah.
And what I could tell is that your life is. Has really blossomed. You're a very social guy. People love you. Your work is great. You're very meticulous about what you're doing. You're creative about what you're doing. I've been with you on a lot of jobs. We worked on a lot of jobs going through numbers, and this turned out fantastic. And now you have a life. Now you see the light, and you say to yourself, "Okay, this is what it should be." When I first met you, I said, "Guys, this is not how it's supposed to be."
No.
I said, "Don't fool yourself." And everybody looked at me like, "Yeah, this fucking guy doesn't know what he's talking about." But until you get outside of the system and look back at it, you really don't realize. You think this is just, you normalize this thing, and it's not normal. And you're out of it now, and you've established yourself in society. People respect you. You're working all the time, and you have guys working for you. And you have a life that you're building. Okay,
Yeah.
For a change, instead of destroying, you're building a life. And even to the extent that you've taken on some hobbies. Talk about your hobbies.
Oh yeah. So remember when I was in the apartment for the first time for the first winter? You destroy yourself with the drugs and alcohol for that many years. There was no hobbies. There was nothing like that going on. It was just at that point I'm just working really hard and I'm feeling pretty jacked up that winter. You remember, and I was just really out of my I wasn't right. And when you told me you snowboarded, I thought you were crazy. I was like, he's full of it. There's no way. Like in my head, I'm like, this guy.
Well, people look at me, they still say that.
And I was like, I just blew it off, And finally, you got me. You asked me like the third or fourth time, and I'm like, all right, let's do it, And then he took me up there. It was about the third time I was able to do it, and it just changed my life, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing how quickly you picked it up. I mean, really, snowboarding's, it's very difficult to learn. It's easier to get better in, but it's very difficult to learn because it's brutal. I could tell you, I started snowboarding when I was 42, and it took me 3 times before what I call clicked in. My son, who's 8 years old, didn't even finish the lesson, and he never took another lesson.
Yeah.
But you when you start to do those things, you develop that, and you have a passion for it now.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like you talked about building a life. Like my whole life, there was never like any planning for anything or like setting aside some time to go do something fun. I was just for many years I was just going from one debacle to the next, one problem to the next, and I was I never really believed that I was going to be able to do anything like that, and when I got outside this system like you're talking about, I started building a life for myself, and now it's just unbelievable, man. I can make plans to go do something that I really love, and I'm more excited about that kind of stuff than anything I ever done. It's amazing how it changed my life. I'm looking forward to going to Utah this year. I can't wait. And the ability to do that and do it without any, like, there's no one to have to answer to. I can just go and do it. Like, I'm free today.
Right.
Like, it's just a miracle,
Well, we were in Mount Snow the first time we went away. There was probably 15 of us, everybody's younger than me, but other than that, there was 15 of us, and we went to Mount Snow one weekend, and we snowboarded, and we had a good time. Next thing I know, I get a phone call the very next weekend, and they said, where Corey is? I said, no, he's back up at Mount Snow.
Yeah.
I said, you got to be kidding me. He got in his car. He said, I guess you got in your car and you drove up there.
I got in my car and took off, man.
I said, okay, we got him. He's got the bug now.
Yeah.
And then this past winter, we were out in Utah. We had a great time out there, and you really enjoyed that. So there's a passion. So you start to see that life is available to you, and it's a whole different perspective than you had. And why I want to do these things, because I want people to hear that there is a way out. That it doesn't have to be this way. It's not easy.
No.
You have to be accountable. You have to come to truths with yourself, and where you lack and where you can use help, and you have to ask for help. And those things are critical. I know you work with a lot of guys. I know you go to a lot of meetings, and it's great that you do that. I'm hoping this reaches a wider audience, and it's to me, you have everything in front of you, and I'm really happy. I see some really good things, and like I said, the work that you do is unbelievable. What's the name of your company again?
True Built Construction.
True Built Construction. I know you do a ton of work, and the people that I've introduced you don't know Corey's past.
No.
Matter of fact, they have no idea. They just know you as Corey, and because you've left that behind. You've left that system behind, and it's very difficult to break out of that. And the message here is that you can break out of it and be out of that system and live a normal life, and if you start doing the things you need to do one at a time, and they'll build on themselves, and get out of chaos. In a lot of guys I talk to are in the middle of chaos, and I try to tell them, I said, listen, the only thing that's going to bring peace to you is order. You have to put order back in your life.
Yeah.
And that's too much work, or that's too much effort, and I'm not really sure what you're talking about. But chaos is what nature provides, and you have to bring order to it to survive. You know, and I can't tell you how happy I am about, you know, about your progress and your life now, and you know, and I know for the first time that you're really satisfied and happy, and I really appreciate you coming here and telling the story, because the story has to be told. There's a bunch of people who've probably been through very similar things than you've been through, and I just want them to know that there is a way out. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes faith, and it takes accountability and discipline, and you can be out of it. And you know, I really appreciate you coming through.
Oh man, thanks for having me.
All right.
We'll do a second episode.
Yes,
sometime.
I'd love to. I'd love to.